name is Nathan Grepares. I'm with Sword to Sword Historical Fencing in Houston, Texas, and this is one of my students, Jacob Debo. Arturo asked us to put together a workshop video for you guys because Encuentro has to be online this year because of all the crazy stuff happening in the world right now. So we've decided that we're going to put together a little video on thrusting. We're going to go through some basic thrusting mechanics, talk about the anatomy of a good and proper thrust, what makes certain thrusts work versus other thrusts not work. And also we're going to go over some other basic thrusting exercises that can be used as either just warm-ups or can be used as accuracy drills. We'll talk about how to make them into accuracy drills in a bit, but for now, let's get started with just some basic movements to warm up our arms, okay? For starters, we're going to work on some basic overhow to thrust mechanics, and we're going to work both the right side and the left side. Just warm up the arms. So we're going to start on the right shoulder and right votag, and we're going to cut right overhow with a passing step, and then we're going to thrust into left ox with a shuffle step, like that, right? So from there, we're here. Now we come to the left shoulder. We're going to cut a left overhow and thrust into right ox. So we can string these together, and we can go right, thrust to left ox, left, thrust to right ox. And you can do it moving forwards and backwards as you wish. Let's give you guys a side profile as well. Right overhow, thrust into left ox, left overhow, thrust into right ox. Right, thrust to left, left, thrust to right. So I would say do this for maybe about 10 minutes just to kind of, like I said, get your legs, get your arms warmed up, start putting yourself in the mindset of thinking about thrusts. So after we do that, let's work another thrusting exercise. So this is one that was given to me by my first HEMA instructor, Scott Brown, that I began learning from back in 2009. And this is what we call the choo-choo thrusts, like a choo-choo train. So we're going to start on the left side in left fluke, right here, right? And we're going to thrust into or from left fluke with just an extended left fluke position. From here, we're going to bring the sword back and thrust out of left ox, like that. From here, we come back down, thrust again. From here, we come back up, thrust again. So all together, looks like this. Thrust, 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 and thrust. One thing that's important to make sure that you keep in mind and that you remember to focus on while you're going through these thrusting exercises is make sure that your crossguard is aligned in the correct position so that you have, you're training and building good habits, right? You don't want to make thrusts with your crossguard like this because you can't catch the opponent's weapon with anything but your fingers, and you don't want to get cut in the fingers, right? So we're here, the crossguard is pointing down towards the ground like that, and I thrust like this. And then as I bring it up, as I'm thrusting into left ox, same thing, my crossguard is pointing up in this direction so that my hands aren't going to get hit because my crossguard is like this or because my fingers are exposed in this way. So from here, we thrust out, nice, good, proper structure. We also don't want to overcommit ourselves with our thrust like that. Builds poor body mechanics by teaching you to overextend yourself, and it leads to a whole slew of problems that are best just avoided. So, once more, with those two things in mind, nice and balanced, nice and centered. Thrust, I've got my crossguard in the appropriate position, and thrust, crossguard is in the appropriate position, and my center balance is no further than my lead leg, like so. So we can do this on the left side, and we can also do it on the right side. Same thing over here. Start like this, left foot forward, starting in right fluke, and we thrust up, we bring it back, and we thrust out. We bring it back, thrust up, thrust out, thrust up, and thrust out. So this can be used as just a simple warm-up exercise to, get the blood flowing in your legs and in your arms. We can also turn it into an accuracy drill, right? And you do that very simply by finding a point, finding, for example, something to look at like this picture on the wall here, and trying to keep your point aligned with that as you're making your thrust. Let's give you guys a little look at what that might look like. So if I'm working on the right side, I'm just trying to keep my point, from my perspective, in line with that picture. And that helps me to develop some more fine-tuned point control, because that's one of the most important things when we're making thrusts. That's one of the most important things to be aware of is your point control, because you want to be able to thrust exactly where you're trying to stab instead of just going anywhere, right? So I would say for warm-up to do about 5 minutes of the Oberhaus thrusting exercise, and then 5 minutes of thrusting on the left side, and then 5 more minutes of thrusting on the right side. Should be good and nice and ready to go by then. So now that that's out of the way, let's talk about what makes a good thrust, okay? So first of all, let's talk about why thrusts are important. A lot of people in HEMA tend to shy away from making thrusts, and I believe it's because we like the feeling of power and control that a cut can give us when we make contact with our opponent's weapon. We also just naturally like to beat each other up, which is great. I think that people tend to shy away from thrusts because they feel like they're a little bit less secure in a way. Because when I make a cut, if my opponent takes any line, if he's in left flute, if I make a cut, I can clear all of these lines all at once, boom, like that. I clear every possible line that he's going to be on, and he's not really a threat to me anymore. If I'm making a thrust from that same blade relationship, I don't have the luxury of knocking his sword all the way out of those different planes. So maybe I feel a little bit more hesitant to make the thrust because I have to be way more precise in my movements when I'm making it. Thank you. I think that might be part of why people shy away from thrusts, as well as like I mentioned earlier, people just like to cut things and like to smash and like to hit. But I think personally, I think that thrusts are one of the most martially sound, as well as even when it comes to like sportive competitions, one of the best things that you can do, because there are few things that lock your opponent out in a tournament or completely kill them very easily in a martial context as easily as a thrust will, right? So for example, if we're sparring, if it's a tournament or whatever, if I make a very simple thrust just like this, I've got complete control over his weapon. There's no worry about an afterblow, double hit, anything like that. That applies to both tournaments and martial fencing as well, right? I don't want to have to worry about those things. So a thrust in this case can be more effective and safer than perhaps if I were to cut at his arms, because maybe now here I have to strike at the arms and control the weapon, or strike and like a single time counter or single time attack where I'm striking both the weapon and hitting him at the same time. But those, I think, leave you exposed to quite a few other problems that I think that thrusts just are generally more utilitarian and safer to do, is basically all it comes down to. So how do we make a good thrust? The anatomy of a good thrust has 3 main points. We've got blade positioning, body positioning, and point positioning. We're going to break all of them down for you today, okay? So for starters, blade positioning, right? So if we bind, blade positioning is what we use in our school. It's the term that we use for a weak and strong relationship, right? From the beginning, you have to have a good, weak, and strong relationship for the thrust. Because if I start here with my weak on his strong, and I try to make a thrust, and he just pushes a little bit to the side, there's no way that I can compete with that kind of pressure, right? So I want to make sure that I've got my blade in a good spot on his to start with. And we do that very easily from a plow bind. We do that by thrusting into left ox like we were doing in the warm-up, right? So from here, as I move forward and I thrust into left ox, I'm putting my strong on his weak and therefore getting much better control. And now, if he tries to push my sword offline in the same way, it doesn't work nearly as well. So if you have a training partner, spend a few minutes just working just that. So we're here, working in a straight line, like this, and just from here, thrusting into left ox. And again, thrusting into left ox, making sure that you're collecting his sword in that manner as you go, right? It's kind of scooping it up so that you can maintain control of it. So that's the first point to a successful thrust. The second point is body positioning, where your body is in relation to both bind and your opponent, right? So for right here, if we take that same thrust that we're working with from right here, if I make this thrust, and even if I've got a good weak on strong relationship, if he's stronger than me, if he happens to push my sword aside before I even begin moving, if my body is not there, what happens when he pushes is that the structure collapses because there's nothing in this area to stop the sword from being pushed that way. I can't redirect that energy and that momentum because there's nothing there. So we address this by focusing on our body positioning as well. So from here, all that I'm going to do, instead of moving straight in with my thrust, I'm going to move at a roughly a 45-degree angle out to the side. I don't want to move completely laterally, because then, of course, I won't be able to reach him. But I also don't want to move straight forwards, because then we have the issues that we've just described. So from here, I'm going to move this right foot to, like I said, about a 45-degree angle line. And as I thrust, I'm going to move out like this. And what this does is it repositions my body so that if he puts pressure on my weapon, I can resist it. Even if the thrust doesn't land, I can resist it and fight back without my structure just completely collapsing and having me hanging down to the side. So again, if you've got a partner that you're going to work with, spend a few minutes once more going over that same thing. So we're here, and now as we thrust, instead of moving straight forward, we're going to move over to the side a little bit. And over to the side a little bit, like that. And if you want, they can, your partner can give you a little bit of pressure to kind of simulate a more realistic bind experience. Boom. And you'll see, as I move, when Jacob pushes against my sword, there's a moment where the sword kind of wobbles a little bit, but he ends up falling right into my strong and getting caught at the end of the thrust anyways. And so my thrust can be successful, right? So practice both of those for a few minutes, and then we'll take a look at the last bit, point position. A prudent fencer should always assume that the opponent is going to give them some pressure to resist them, right? Sometimes, in the words of Scott Brown, my first instructor, sometimes the other guy is good too, right? So we should account for that by making a thrust that aims further to the left, if we presume that they're going to be pushing to the right, further to the left than the actual target. What I mean by that is this. So if we reorient ourselves a little bit like this, I don't want to aim straight for his face, because even if I do those first two, the blade position and body position correct, if he gets the slightest edge pushing me over, I may miss, right? If I'm aiming straight at his head. What I really want to do is I want to aim here, past his head, or not past his head, but before his head, as it were. So that now, if he gives me that pressure as I'm making my thrust, nice and slow, it ends up getting pushed right into his face just like that. Now, some of you may ask, what happens if he doesn't give you pressure? And in that case, the answer is you continue doing what you're going to do and you turn it into a draw cut on the neck instead. So from here, if I make that exact same thrust and he doesn't give me any counter pressure, I end up like this. And all that I've got to do is I continue and I slice into the neck like that. And now I've got that hit as well. So once more, point positioning. We want to aim for that part. So we're pushing our point to our upper left while our feet are going to the upper right and our hands are going into the upper left as well. So from here, it goes like that, and if you're lucky, he'll end up pushing it right into his face, and if not, then you'll end up cutting into his neck, which is also pretty lucky as well. So from here, once more, as we thrust, boom, like that, and it goes right into his face. So those are the three main points of a basic thrust, right? This is it's a basic Einwinden thrust in German. If you're not German longsword fencers and you're not familiar with the terminology, Einwinden means an inside wind or an on wind, where my sword is in between his sword and me. So this is again simply just moving to my right, nice and easy step like that. There is another variation of this that we can do that's maybe not better, maybe not worse, but it's just another option to have in different situations. So instead of moving that way, away from his sword, I can move this way and move towards his sword. And this has the added benefit of using my legs and my body to power through his weapon, right? Right here, I'm kind of like behind his force in a way, right? Because I'm moving this way with my body, and if his sword pushes, that's the way it goes. But if I move this way with my thrust and he tries to push against, boom, I'm moving into him instead of away from him, as it were, right? And now, of course, we've got a variety of techniques, the Handetruken and just breaking and cutting below and other things that we can do from here as well. But from here, we do the same thrust, and if he just tries to give me some pressure pushing me that way, not rising up, but just pushing me that way, like this, the power and weight of my body is all behind this action without me having to make any like percussive or powerful or power generating actions with my arms, right? So now he's very exposed. His structure is even more compromised now than it was before, right? Wouldn't you say? So we can do it moving to the right, we can do it moving to the left, whatever the situation calls for is probably the best way to go about doing it. So that's about it for our lesson on thrusts. It's a very basic and rudimentary introduction to thrust as interpreted through the German longsword traditions. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have a great Encuentro 2021. Thank you guys.